My name is Stella Nova. I'm 32 years old, and I run my own graphic design studio in Chicago. But 20 years ago, I was a different person. I was Luna Astor, a 12-year-old girl from Mesa, Arizona, who made the mistake of believing in one last chance. My parents, Silas and Clara, were masters of perception, respected business owners who curated a perfect family image for the outside world. They were about to teach me a lesson in what they called tough love, a lesson designed not to build character, but to break a spirit. What they didn't know was that the cruelty they had planned for me in the heart of Union Station would backfire spectacularly. They wanted to teach me what it felt like to be abandoned. Instead, they taught me how to survive them. This isn't just a story about being left behind. It's the story of how I began to find my way forward, a journey that started with a single brutal act of betrayal. Have you ever stood in a crowded room and felt utterly, terrifyingly alone, left behind by the very people who were supposed to protect you? If you've ever tasted that specific bitterness of being treated like you're disposable, leave a comment below. And now come back with me in time and let me show you how the map of my scars was first drawn. It all started with an A-, a single insignificant scratch on an otherwise perfect report card. In our quiet, sun-baked corner of Mesa, that A- became an indictment. That night, from the sliver of light under my bedroom door, I heard their voices whispering in the kitchen, sharp and cold over the clinking of ice in my father's whiskey glass. "She's too soft, Clara," my father, Silas, hissed. "Too sensitive. The world will eat her alive." My mother's reply was the perfect, chilling echo of his cruelty. "She needs a real lesson, Silas, something she'll never forget." The next morning, they announced a surprise family trip to Chicago. Just the three of us. My brother, Orion, their golden child, was to stay home. A stupid, desperate flicker of hope ignited in my 12-year-old chest. Maybe this is their apology, I thought. Maybe, just for once, it'll just be me. The 3-hour drive in the dark blue Ford Explorer was a masterclass in psychological torture. My father drove, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping a stainless steel travel mug that smelled sharper than coffee. He turned the trip into a relentless pop quiz on American history, on state capitals, on things no sixth grader was expected to know. "What's the capital of Montana, Luna?" he'd bark, and when I hesitated, a smirk would crawl across his face. "See, Clara, head full of useless fluff." My mother, sitting in the passenger seat, would flip a page of her Southern Living magazine without looking up, her voice a syrupy poison. "Just try your best, sweetie. Your father only wants you to be sharp." The air in the car grew thick and hostile, a suffocating tension the rattling air conditioner couldn't touch. I shrank into the back seat, watching the flat Illinois cornfields blur past the window, that little flame of hope inside me sputtering, dying, turning to cold ash. We arrived at Union Station around noon. The building was a behemoth, a cavern of marble and echoing noise that swallowed people whole. The scale of it, the rush and roar of a real city, was overwhelming. "Wait here," my father commanded, pointing to a massive cold pillar near the main entrance. "We're going to find better parking and grab some food. We'll be back in 15 minutes. My voice was a tiny squeak. "Can I come with you?" He let out a short, barking laugh that made me flinch. "A big girl like you? It's 15 minutes. You're 12, for God's sake." So I waited. 15 minutes bled into 20, then 30. The initial knot of anxiety in my stomach began to twist into a cold, sharp panic. I watched the giant clock on the wall, each tick a hammer blow against my composure. After an hour, I was fighting back tears, my throat tight and dry. And then, through the great glass windows facing the street, I saw it, the familiar silhouette of our blue Ford Explorer. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. They didn't forget me. I scrambled towards the exit, my hand raised, waving frantically, my voice catching in my throat as I tried to shout, "Mom, Dad!" The car slowed, almost to a stop, directly in front of the doors. I could see them clearly. My father was behind the wheel, and when his eyes met mine, a wide, wicked grin spread across his face. He lifted a hand and gave a little wave, not of recognition, but of pure, taunting mockery. Then my mother, the woman who gave me life, leaned across the passenger seat and rolled down the window. The city air, thick with exhaust fumes and noise, blasted my face. She smiled, a bright, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes, and her voice cut through the din, sharp and clear as breaking glass. "You're so smart, Luna. Let's see you find your way home from here." Their laughter, both of them, a single horrifying sound, erupted as the car accelerated, merging seamlessly back into the river of Chicago traffic. They were gone, and I was alone? Why? What did I do wrong? Why? The question echoed in the vast, empty space where my trust in them used to be. The answer wasn't a single, clean event. It was a lifetime of them, a tangled, painful map of scars that all led directly to this moment. The abandonment at Union Station wasn't an anomaly. It was the brutal graduation ceremony from their school of tough love. It was a convenient, almost noble-sounding label they used to disguise calculated cruelty as a form of parenting, a way to justify breaking a child's spirit in the name of building character. I remember being 7, my small hand lost in my mother's, as we walked through the bright, overwhelming aisles of a Walmart. I had seen a Hershey's bar at the checkout, and in a moment of pure, childish desire, I'd cried for it. My mother, with a placid, unreadable smile, led me away from the line, her grip firm on my arm. She walked me down the long, cavernous toy aisle, pointed to something on a high shelf, and when I looked up, she was just gone. She vanished. She left me there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably over an hour, a small, terrified child, adrift in a sea of strangers and towering shelves of plastic and cardboard. The fluorescent lights hummed, the announcements over the intercom sounded like a foreign language, and every passing cart felt like a threat. When a kindly, heavy-set security guard finally found me, my face streaked with tears and snot, and reunited us, my mother knelt down. Her voice, devoid of any warmth or relief, was a cold, precise instrument. "Perhaps now," she said, wiping my face with a rough paper towel, "you'll learn not to be so greedy." It wasn't a lesson in discipline. It was a lesson in terror, in the absolute power they held over my world. My 11th birthday was their masterpiece of passive cruelty. My mother had promised a small party, a sleepover with my 2 best friends, pizza from Domino's, and a rented movie. I had counted down the days, giddy with a rare sense of anticipation, a feeling of normalcy. But on the morning of my birthday, they announced a surprise trip to Six Flags instead. "Surprise!" my father boomed with a hollow, forced enthusiasm. They drove me to the amusement park, the smell of stale coffee, and my father's whiskey-laced breath filling the car. At the gate, they handed me a crisp $20 bill. "Have fun," my mother said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "We'll pick you up at 5. Then they turned and walked away. I spent my birthday utterly alone, the $20 barely covering a slice of greasy pizza, a Coke, and a single lonely ride on the Ferris wheel. From the top, I could see the whole park spread out below me, a vibrant tapestry of joy I couldn't touch. For hours, I sat on a bench near the carousel, watching other families laugh and share giant tubs of popcorn, watching fathers lift their children onto their shoulders. The happy screams from the roller coasters sounded like they were from another planet. The loneliness was a physical ache, a hollowing out of my chest that was more terrifying than any thrill ride. They finally picked me up at 7, 2 hours late, smelling of dinner from a restaurant I wasn't invited to. Their excuse was a casual, "We were teaching you about self-reliance." I didn't cry. I had already learned that my tears only seemed to give them a quiet, unsettling satisfaction. The injustice was sharpest, a constant grinding reality, when measured against my brother, Orion. He was the golden child, the sun around which our family uneasily orbited. When Orion accidentally shattered my mother's favorite antique ceramic vase, a family heirloom, my father just ruffled his hair. "It's okay, son. Accidents happen. We know you didn't mean it." But a week later, when I spilled a glass of milk on the corner of the Persian rug in the living room, my mother shrieked as if I'd set the house on fire. "Clumsy! Can't you do anything right, Luna? Look at this mess." My father dragged me to my room and made me write, "I will be more careful with family property," 100 times on a legal pad. I became their scapegoat, the designated container for all their nameless frustrations and disappointments. Any problem in the house, big or small, somehow became my fault. This constant grinding comparison taught me a fundamental truth of my existence. I was simply and irrevocably worth less. In that desert of affection, I found my own small secret oasis. It was art. I would retreat to my room for hours with a stack of printer paper my father brought home from his office and a handful of sharpened Ticonderoga pencils. I drew other worlds, castles in the clouds and enchanted forests where animals could talk and girls had hair like rivers of starlight. In my sketchbooks, I wasn't the clumsy, disappointing Luna Astor. I was a princess, a warrior, someone who was loved and valued. It was my only escape, my silent rebellion. I remember drawing one image over and over, a small girl curled up inside a shimmering golden orb of light, a magical shield that no harsh word could penetrate. It was my only defense. I didn't know then that the real world had no room for such magic, and that one day that fragile imaginary orb would shatter, leaving me completely exposed. That imaginary orb of golden light I'd spent years drawing shattered the moment their laughter faded into the city's roar. Here in the cold, echoing expanse of Union Station, there was no magic. There was only the hard, polished floor, the murmur of 1,000 strangers, and the terrifying reality of being utterly alone. For the first hour, I was paralyzed by a numbing shock. Then the fear began to seep in, cold and sharp. The cacophony of the station became a monster. The screech of train whistles, the garbled announcements over the PA system, the smell of hot dogs and pretzels from a nearby cart. It all felt threatening. I found a row of hard plastic chairs and curled into one, making myself as small as possible, clutching the straps of my backpack. My parents' voices were a relentless loop in my head. Never show weakness, never talk to strangers, never ask for help. My stomach growled, a hollow, aching sound, but I couldn't bring myself to touch the 7 crumpled dollar bills in my pocket. That was all I had. It was my lifeline, and I was too terrified to use it. Nearly 3 hours had passed. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall, arched windows. casting long shadows across the great hall. I was watching a janitor methodically push a wide broom when a gentle voice startled me. "Honey, are you lost?" I looked up to see a woman in a station uniform. She was older, with a kind, wrinkled face and a cloud of soft white hair that reminded me of my grandmother in Arizona, the one I rarely saw. Her name tag read Eleanor. My first instinct, drilled into me by years of conditioning, was to lie. I shook my head, my eyes fixed on my worn sneakers. "I'm waiting for someone," I mumbled. But Eleanor didn't walk away. Instead, she knelt, a gesture that brought her down to my level, her kind blue eyes full of a concern that felt dangerously unfamiliar. "Where are your parents, dear?" she asked softly. That was the question that broke me. The carefully constructed dam of my composure crumbled. The past 3 hours of fear, confusion, and the searing pain of their betrayal erupted in a single ragged sob. "They left me," I choked out, the words tearing from my throat. "They drove away. They said to find my own way home. But home is in Arizona." Eleanor's expression shifted instantly from concern to alarm. She put a steadying hand on my shoulder and helped me to my feet, guiding me away from the public waiting area and towards a quieter corridor near the administrative offices. She sat me down on a bench, her presence a circle of calm in my chaotic world. "You stay right here," she said, her voice firm but gentle. She returned moments later and led me into a small, cluttered security office. A large, middle-aged man with a kind face and a thick mustache looked up from his desk. His name was Officer Dominic. Eleanor quickly explained the situation, and Officer Dominic's friendly demeanor became serious. He asked me questions in a calm, patient voice. My name, my age, my parents' names. He wrote everything down on a clipboard. He even tried calling the home number I gave him twice, but there was no answer. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pity that for the first time didn't feel condescending. "What your parents did, Luna," he said, his voice low and serious, "is illegal. It's called child abandonment." Hearing it named, hearing it defined as a crime by a man in a uniform, sent a jolt through me. It wasn't a lesson, it wasn't a joke, it was wrong. A small, buried part of me that had always believed I was the problem started to feel a flicker of validation. Things moved quickly after that. A uniformed Chicago police officer was called in. Her name was Maria Rodriguez. She was younger than the others, with a no-nonsense air but kind eyes. She bought me a hot chocolate from a vending machine, the warm cup a small comfort in my cold, trembling hands. She sat with me in that little office and had me tell the story all over again, writing everything down in a small notebook with a serious, focused expression that made my situation feel real and important. She validated my experience, not with sympathy, but with procedure. "We've issued an alert," she explained, "and we need to contact the Department of Children and Family Services." The acronym DCFS sounded terrifying and official, like something from a TV show. It meant my life was truly spiraling out of my parents' control and into the hands of strangers. But as Officer Rodriguez placed a reassuring hand on my arm, a strange new feeling bloomed alongside the fear, a fragile, tentative sense of relief. Someone was in charge. Someone was finally protecting me. "Right now," she said, her voice softening, "a social worker named Serafina Vance is going to come talk to you." My social worker, Serafina Vance, was the one who led me into the sterile, quiet meeting room at the DCFS office. I met Ethan and Maya Thorne on a Tuesday afternoon. I was 12 years old, and had already learned that adults were puzzles with missing pieces, their smiles often hiding traps. I sat rigidly in my chair, hands clenched in my lap, bracing myself for the inevitable interrogation. I expected probing questions about my past, condescending reassurances, or the thinly veiled pity I had come to despise. But they offered none of it. Ethan, a man with kind eyes and faint traces of clay under his fingernails, just looked at me and said, "The room we have for you has a big window that looks out onto the garden. I thought you might like the light." He was a high school art teacher, Serafina had told me. Then Maya, a pediatric nurse with a gentle, calming presence, added, "We just want you to know, Luna, that our home is your home for as long as you need it to be." Her words were simple, an offer without conditions, a language I didn't speak. I didn't know how to respond. So I just nodded, my eyes downcast, a familiar shield. But for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel like a problem to be solved. They lived in a modest 2-story house in Naperville, a quiet suburb where the lawns were neatly manicured and kids left their bikes out front. The air here felt different, calmer. My new room had walls the color of butter and a white quilt on the bed. There was a desk, a chair, and a wall of empty bookshelves. "We wanted you to make it your own," Maya explained, her voice soft. "Pictures, posters, books, whatever makes you feel comfortable." I waited for the other shoe to drop, for the list of unspoken rules and impossible expectations that had governed my life. It never came. That first night, they made spaghetti and meatballs for dinner. I was so nervous, my hands so unsteady, that I knocked over my glass of milk. The white liquid spread across the polished wood of the dining table like a blooming disaster. I froze. My entire body went rigid, my breath caught in my chest, a conditioned response to the explosion I was sure would follow. I was waiting for the shriek of "clumsy," for the hiss of "can't you do anything right?" for the inevitable punishment. Instead, Ethan simply stood up, went to the kitchen, and came back with a dish towel. He calmly wiped up the spill and said, "It's okay, honey, it's just milk, it happens." The sheer quiet normalcy of his reaction was more shocking than any shouting match. It disarmed me completely. Later that night, I cried into my new pillow, not from fear or sadness, but from a profound, aching confusion. Trust wasn't a switch. It was a slow, painful thaw. For weeks, I walked on eggshells, waiting for them to reveal their true nature, to drop the facade of kindness and show the cold, hard anger I had been trained to expect from adults. But day after day, they remained steadfast in their gentle support. Ethan never asked about my past, but he saw the way I clung to my sketchbook. One afternoon, I came home from school to find a new set of watercolor paints and a thick, fresh pad of paper sitting on my desk. There was no grand announcement. He just poked his head in my room later and said, "Let me know if you need anything else." A week later, Maya handed me a small, shiny object. It was a key. "So you can come and go as you please," she said with a simple smile. "It's your house, too." I held the cool metal in my palm, its weight feeling immense. At my old house, every door was a potential trap. This key wasn't just metal, it was a statement, it was trust. It was a promise that I wasn't a guest or a prisoner, but a part of the home. 3 months after I moved in, the phone call came. It was Orion. His voice on the other end of the line was hesitant, a ghost from another life. "They miss you," he said, the words clumsy and uncertain. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Do they?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion I was feeling. There was a long pause. Well, in their own way, he conceded. Then the truth, raw and unvarnished, spilled out. They regret that you're gone, Luna. I don't think they understand why what they did was so wrong. My breath caught. It was the confirmation I both craved and dreaded. It wasn't remorse for their actions, but regret for their consequences. Before we hung up, he said something that surprised me. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I know they were harder on you. I should have said something." It wasn't enough to heal anything, not really, but it was real. And it was a painful gift because it confirmed a devastating truth. Even their golden child, the one who benefited from the system, knew it was wrong. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the stark contrast between the two families in my life. One gave me my blood, the other gave me a key. One gave me lessons in cruelty, the other showed me what it felt like to not be a burden. It made me realize that sometimes the kindest hands are those of strangers. In your journey, who was your Eleanor or your Thorn family? Who was the person, a teacher, a neighbor, a friend, who offered you a safe harbor when you needed it most? Share a story about your guardian angel in the comments below, so we can all celebrate the goodness that finds us, even in the darkest of times. And in the next chapter, you'll see why I needed that safe harbor so desperately, because the shadows of my old family were about to return. The peace was shattered 6 months after the incident at the station. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope with a lawyer's letterhead, an official intrusion into the quiet world I was carefully building with the Thorns. Serafina sat with me in the familiar sterile DCFS office as she read the letter aloud. My biological parents, Silas and Clara Astor, were petitioning the court for my return. The letter was a work of fiction, claiming they had excelled in their mandatory parenting classes and had a profound realization of their mistakes. It was filled with weaponized sentimental language about how they missed their darling daughter and yearned for their family to be whole again. Each word felt like a physical violation, a poisonous dart aimed at the fragile sense of safety I had found. A wave of nausea washed over me, the quiet of the house with the yellow walls, the smell of Ethan's paints, the comfort of Maya's presence. It was all under threat. The shadow of my old life, long and cold, was reaching out to reclaim me. The day of the family court hearing was gray and overcast, matching the dread that had settled deep in my bones. My parents arrived dressed for their roles. My mother wore a plain, modest dress, her hair pulled back severely, her face a mask of sorrow. My father wore an old, slightly frayed suit, a costume of humility. They looked like grieving parents, not the perpetrators of a cruel and calculated act. Before the judge, their lawyer painted a picture of two loving parents who, in a misguided attempt to teach their daughter a lesson about self-reliance, had made a terrible error in judgment. "We just want what's best for her," my father said, his voice thick with false emotion. "We love our daughter." When it was my turn, my therapist, Dr. Bright, sat beside me, a silent, steadying presence. I recounted the events at Union Station, my voice quiet but clear. I spoke of the taunting wave, the cold laughter. As I finished, my mother interrupted, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy. "Oh, honey," she said, looking at the judge, "a child's memory is such a funny thing. She's exaggerating, of course. She was always so dramatic." The courtroom went silent. The air crackled with her lie. It was a public execution of my reality, a denial so brazen it stole my breath. In that moment, she wasn't just lying to the court, she was trying to erase my truth, just as she had tried to do my whole life. this was gaslighting as performance art, and for a horrifying second, I felt the old familiar doubt creep in. Was I being dramatic? Did I remember it wrong? But then I saw Maya and Ethan sitting in the back row, their faces etched with a mixture of anger and protective love. And I knew my truth was real. During a recess, while we waited in the sterile hallway, my mother made her move. She cornered me near the water fountain, her eyes scanning the corridor before she spoke. "Luna," she whispered, pulling a small, iconic blue box from her purse. "I bought you the Tiffany necklace you always wanted, the one with the little heart." She tried to press the box into my hand. "Come home, baby. Orion misses you. The house isn't a home without you." I recoiled as if her touch would burn me. I looked into her eyes, searching for a flicker of remorse, of genuine love, and found nothing but cold, desperate calculation. The strength I had been gathering for months finally found its voice. "I don't want your necklace," I said, my own voice trembling but firm, surprising me with its resolve. "I wanted parents." Her face, so carefully composed in its sorrow, flickered. For a single unguarded second, the mask slipped, revealing a flash of raw, indignant anger before it was smoothed over again. She hadn't expected me to refuse the bribe. She had expected the same compliant, fearful child she had left at the station. The judge, a stern but fair woman, had seen through their performance. Citing my testimony and Dr. Bright's reports, she denied their petition for immediate custody. Instead, she ordered them to complete a comprehensive 2-year rehabilitation program, with only monthly supervised visits allowed. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As the ruling was announced, my father's carefully crafted facade crumbled completely. He shot to his feet, his face contorted not with sadness, but with pure, undiluted rage. He didn't look at the judge or his lawyer. He looked directly at me, his eyes burning with a cold, hateful fire. His lawyer tried to pull him down, but not before he spat the words across the courtroom. A low, venomous hiss that chilled me to the bone. "If you think you can get away from this family that easily," he seethed, "you are dead wrong." It wasn't a shout, it was a promise that this fight, my fight for freedom, was far from over. My father's eyes haunted my nightmares for weeks after the hearing. His threat, cold and venomous, coiled around my newfound sense of peace, threatening to strangle it. But 2 months later, news arrived that was more shocking and seismic than any nightmare. Serafina delivered it to me, Ethan, and Maya in the quiet of the Thorns' living room. Faced with the court's mandate of a 2-year intensive rehabilitation program, my biological parents had made a choice. They had filed a petition to voluntarily terminate their parental rights. Serafina read their official statement, a document dripping with self-serving martyrdom. "We will not be denigrated by the state for trying to raise a strong, independent daughter," my father had declared. "If the government thinks it can do a better job, then let them try." The words were meant to sound noble, like a sacrifice, but I heard them for what they were, the ultimate act of arrogant cowardice. They hadn't fought for me. They had chosen their pride over their child, and in their final selfish act, they had given me the one thing I never dared to hope for, my freedom. The last toxic chain had been broken, not by me, but by them. I was free. On my 13th birthday, Ethan and Maya took me to a small, cozy Italian restaurant in downtown Naperville, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles dripping wax down the sides of old Chianti bottles. After we finished our pasta, they slid a small flat box across the table. I expected a gift, but inside there was only a single unfolded piece of paper. It was a petition for adoption, with the line for the child's name left tellingly blank. "We don't want to replace anyone, Luna," Ethan said, his voice thick with an emotion I was just beginning to recognize as genuine love. "We just want to be your family, if you'll have us." Maya reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "You don't have to decide right now," she said softly. But I had already decided. I had decided in 100 small moments. The first time Ethan praised my artwork without criticism. The night Maya sat with me through a bad dream. The simple, profound fact that they had never once made me feel like a burden. "Yes," I said, the word a quiet exhale. And for the first time in my life, I felt tears of pure, unadulterated happiness trail down my cheeks. "Yes, I will." It was a yes, not just to them, but to a future I was finally allowed to have. In the months that followed, as the adoption process moved forward, a new idea began to take root. I spoke about it first with Dr. Bright, my therapist. "Luna Astor is the name of a girl who was left behind," I explained, the words feeling truer than anything I'd ever said. "That girl doesn't exist anymore. I don't want to be her." I wanted a name that was mine, a name that looked forward, not back. I chose it myself, carefully. Stella for star, Nova for new, a new star. When I nervously told Ethan and Maya my idea, fearing they might see it as a rejection of something, they embraced it without hesitation. "Stella Nova," Maya said, testing the name on her tongue, her smile radiant. "It's beautiful, it's you." In that moment, surrounded by their unconditional support, I felt myself being reborn. I was no longer the moon, destined only to reflect the cold light of others. I would be a star, generating my own warmth, my own light. The day the adoption and name change were finalized was a bright, clear day in Chicago. The family courtroom felt different this time, smaller, more intimate. There were no reporters, no tension, just the quiet dignity of the moment. The judge smiled down from her bench. "Well, congratulations and welcome to the family, Stella Nova," she said, and her gavel came down with a soft, definitive thud. That night, the Thorns threw a small party. It was just us, Serafina, and Dr. Bright. We ate Maya's homemade lasagna, so rich and comforting, followed by a dense, fudgy chocolate cake. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I laughed a real full-throated laugh, a laugh that came from my gut, free of any weight or fear. I had a family, I had a name, I had a home. In the quiet of my room that night, I took out all the old sketchbooks, filled with the dark, fearful drawings of Luna. I looked at them one last time, then closed the covers and tucked them away in the back of my closet. The past was sealed. A new blank page was waiting. I opened my first new sketchbook in Ethan's sunlit art classroom at Naperville North High School. The pages were crisp and white, a stark contrast to the old, tear-stained books I had hidden away. High school was a challenge. I was a quiet, watchful girl, like a feral cat that had been brought indoors, grateful for the warmth, but still flinching at sudden movements. Making friends was difficult. The muscle for casual trust had atrophied in me. But in the art room, surrounded by the smell of turpentine and acrylic paint, I found my sanctuary. Ethan, now not just my dad, but also my mentor, guided me without ever imposing his will. He taught me about perspective and color theory, but the most important lesson he taught me was how to find my own voice on the canvas. In my junior year, a charcoal portrait I did of Maya won first prize in the district art competition. Seeing my work hanging in the school library with a blue ribbon pinned to it, was the first time I felt a surge of pride that was entirely my own. It wasn't about pleasing anyone or avoiding punishment. It was an objective validation of my skill, a powerful antidote to a childhood of being told I wasn't good enough. College at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago was like stepping into another dimension. The campus pulsed with creative energy. There I met Chloe. She was vibrant and fearless, a whirlwind of neon hair and bold opinions. She saw right through the high defensive walls I'd built. "You know," she said to me one day over coffee at a nearby cafe, "you built the tallest walls I've ever seen, but I can tell there's a really beautiful garden growing inside." Her friendship was a gentle siege. She challenged my creative boundaries, but always respected my personal ones. Through her, I learned to trust again, one shared secret and late-night study session at a time. Then came Leo. He was a photography major with kind, patient eyes that seemed to see more than I showed. Our first date, a simple coffee, stretched into a 5-hour conversation. When I eventually told him, vaguely, that my biological parents weren't good people and that I'd been adopted as a teen, he just nodded. "Family's complicated," he said simply. "I'm more interested in who you are now than where you came from." His patience was infinite. The first time he reached for my hand and I flinched away, a vestige of old trauma, he just gave a small, understanding nod and kept talking as if nothing had happened. The next time I was ready. Our relationship wasn't without its tests. 8 months in, a misunderstanding about plans left me waiting alone at a restaurant for over an hour. By the time Leo arrived, breathless and apologizing about his dead phone, the trigger had already been pulled. The old fear, the ghost of Union Station, had me locked in a bathroom stall, hyperventilating. "You abandoned me," I accused him later, the words heavy with a history he was just beginning to understand. He didn't offer platitudes, he just listened as I finally told him the whole story. When I was done, his response was not one of pity, but of profound promise. "I can't promise I'll never mess up and disappoint you, Stella," he said, his voice steady. "But I can promise that I will never, ever hurt you on purpose, and I will always come back." After graduation, I landed a junior designer position at a firm downtown. The corporate world was a new kind of challenge. I learned to present my ideas in boardrooms, to defend my creative choices, and to accept criticism without it feeling like a personal attack. Each successful project was a brick, rebuilding the confidence that had been systematically demolished throughout my childhood. 2 years later, I saved enough to rent my first apartment, a small studio in Lincoln Park. The feeling of turning the key in the lock of a place that was entirely mine was intoxicating. I spent a weekend painting the walls a calming shade of blue and assembling IKEA furniture. Each turn of the Allen wrench a small act of self-reliance. This wasn't just an apartment. It was a declaration of independence, a silent rebuttal to my mother's long-ago taunts that I'd never survive without them. Over the years, the Astors tried to breach my new life. A friend request on Facebook from a strange profile that turned out to be my mother. An email from my father disguised as a business inquiry that quickly pivoted to a request for money. Each attempt was a ghostly knock on a door I had long since sealed. I would simply block, delete, and move on. I discussed it with Dr. Bright. "You don't owe them forgiveness, Stella," she told me, her voice firm. "You don't owe them an explanation. You only owe yourself peace." Her words were a powerful permission slip, the final validation I needed, so I chose peace. I scrubbed my online presence, tightened my privacy settings, and built a digital fortress around the life I had made for myself. The past was buried. I was no longer a child waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was the architect of my own life, the keeper of my own boundaries. I was safe. I was free. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The sunlight was streaming into my Chicago studio, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I was at the peak of my career, running my own successful design firm, happily married to Leo, my patient, loving husband. The life I had painstakingly built for myself was calm, ordered, and safe. I was reviewing a final proof for a major client, a mug of freshly brewed coffee steaming beside my laptop, when my phone began to vibrate violently against the polished surface of my desk. I glanced at it, annoyed at the interruption. Then I saw the screen, an unknown number from Mesa, Arizona, and below it a notification that read 29 missed calls. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it slammed to a dead halt. The air rushed out of my lungs. My meticulously designed studio dissolved, the smell of coffee vanished, and in an instant I was 12 years old again, standing on the cold marble floor of Union Station. My hands began to shake, a tremor I couldn't control. A cold sweat broke out across my back. It was a full-blown panic attack, a visceral physiological hijacking. 20 years of therapy, of healing, of building a fortress around my past. And it all came undone in the face of a single notification. The body, I learned in that horrifying moment, never truly forgets. The scars are always there, waiting for the right pressure to ache again. A new notification pinged. Voicemail. My hand trembled as I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear. The voice was gravelly, exhausted, but instantly recognizable. Stella, Luna. The hesitation, the use of my old name, was a small, sharp knife causing in an old wound. It's me, Orion. Please, call me back. It's an emergency. It's about Dad. I slid down the side of my kitchen cabinets until I was huddled on the floor, the cold tile a shock against my skin. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut. For 2 decades, I had been Stella Nova. I had built that name, that identity, brick by brick. And with one phone call, they were trying to drag Luna Astor back from the grave. A white-hot rage, fierce and protective, surged through me, momentarily eclipsing the fear. Why now? Why can't they just let me be? But this time I wasn't alone. This was the most profound difference between the woman on the floor and the girl at the station. My first call was to Leo. He heard the panic in my voice, canceled his morning meeting without a second thought, and was home in 20 minutes. He didn't ask questions or offer solutions. He just wrapped his arms around me as I shook and said the 4 words I needed to hear most. You are not alone. My second call was to Maya. She listened patiently as I recounted the morning's events, her voice a steady, calming presence over the phone. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, honey, she said. You don't owe them anything. My third call was an email to Dr. Bright, my therapist, requesting an emergency session. My support system, the family I had chosen, and the professional I trusted formed a circle around me. They didn't tell me what to do. They simply held the space, giving me the safety to figure it out for myself. That night was sleepless, filled with a churning mixture of anger, grief, and a bewildering sense of obligation. After a long, difficult session with Dr. Bright the next day, a decision began to form, cold and clear in my mind. I would not be rushing to a hospital bed in Arizona. I would not be playing the role of the dutiful daughter they never treated me as. But I couldn't ignore it either. That would be letting them have a different kind of power over me, the power of the unknown. I'm not doing this for them, I explained to Leo and Maya that evening, my voice finally steady. I'm doing this for me, for the 12-year-old girl who never got any answers. I need to close this chapter myself, on my own terms. I picked up my phone, my hand no longer shaking, and called Orion back. I agreed to meet him, not in Mesa, not at the hospital, but at a neutral, anonymous coffee shop in Phoenix. I would face the past, but I would do it on my turf, by my rules. This wasn't a journey of forgiveness. It was a mission for intel, a final act of reclaiming my own story. I booked the flight to Phoenix myself, a single round-trip ticket. It was an act of power. The drone of the airplane engine was a steady hum, a mechanical mantra for the mission I was on. This wasn't a pilgrimage of forgiveness, it was a final intelligence gathering. I chose a generic, soulless Starbucks in a Phoenix strip mall, a place of ultimate neutrality, halfway between the airport and the life I had meticulously escaped. I arrived first, chose a small isolated table in the corner, and ordered a black coffee, its bitterness a welcome anchor. I needed my senses sharp, my emotions locked down. When Orion walked in, the 20 years since I'd last seen him felt like a century. The confident posture of the golden boy I remembered was gone, replaced by the stooped shoulders of a man perpetually bracing for a blow. His hair, once thick and dark, was thinning and peppered with gray. The lines around his eyes weren't from laughter. They were from a long, weary vigilance. The weight of staying, I realized with a cold clarity, had been far heavier than the difficulty of leaving. Our initial conversation was a painful, awkward exercise in American small talk, a dance of avoidance around the gaping crater in the middle of the room. We talked about the unseasonable heat, the nightmare traffic on the I-10, his soul-crushing job in commercial real estate. I let him lead, offering non-committal hums and short, clipped answers. I kept my posture straight, my hands wrapped around my warm mug, observing him like a scientist studying a specimen. I wasn't his little sister. I was a stranger here to conduct an interview, and he was my only source. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I was in control. Finally, the empty pleasantries withered, and an uncomfortable silence settled between us, thick and heavy, broken only by the sharp hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. He was the one to break it, his gaze dropping to the tabletop. "He had a massive heart attack, Stella," Orion began, his voice strained. "The doctors, they don't think he has much time." I just nodded, a single slow dip of my chin, offering no sympathetic platitude. My silence was a void, a vacuum that demanded to be filled, and he filled it. He painted a bleak, miserable picture of the 2 decades I'd been gone. Silas, our father, had descended deeper into his alcoholism, his charm curdling into a bitter, unpredictable rage. Clara, our mother, had developed an obsessive-compulsive need to clean, scrubbing the house, relentlessly, day after day, as if trying to wash away an invisible, indelible stain. They never really talked about it, Orion admitted, his voice barely a whisper. About what happened, in their version of the story, the day you left became the day their ungrateful daughter ran away and broke the family's heart. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, yet my face remained impassive. Of course, they had rewritten history. They had cast themselves as the tragic victims of my defiance. It was a narrative so twisted, so pathologically self-serving, it made my stomach churn. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low but carrying the sharp edge of a blade. I asked the question that had been a silent, festering wound inside me for 20 years. Did they ever regret it, Orion? Did they ever, for 1 second, regret what they did? He wouldn't meet my eyes. He picked up his wooden stir stick and began to trace the condensation ring his cup had left on the table, a nervous, repetitive motion. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible presence. It was the sound of a man wrestling with a lifetime of practiced denial. "No," he finally admitted, the words so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "They don't regret abandoning you. They only regret that they got caught." He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a defeated, hollow truth. "They still believe that if the police hadn't gotten involved, you would have learned your lesson, and everything would have eventually been fine." That was it. That was the final, brutal confirmation I had flown 1,000 miles to hear. The last, gossamer thin thread of a childish hope I didn't even know I still held. The hope for remorse, for a change of heart, for a simple acknowledgement of my pain, snapped. There was no apology waiting for me in Arizona. There was no catharsis. There was only the same suffocating ego, the same delusional self-interest that had left a 12-year-old girl alone and terrified at Union Station. "Dad wants to see you," Orion said, his voice now pleading, desperate. "He keeps asking for Luna. He might not make it through the week." I looked at my brother, this stranger with a familiar face, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something clinical, like pity. He was a victim too, just a different kind. He was a willing participant who had become a prisoner, trapped in the gravitational pull of their toxicity, his own life shaped and stunted by their darkness. But the pity was a fleeting, hollow thing. It didn't change my resolve. "No, Orion," I said, my voice clear and steady, all the tremor from my morning panic attack completely gone. "The man in that hospital bed doesn't want to see me. He wants to see Luna Astor. He wants to see the little girl he tried to break, perhaps for one last chance to do it right. But she died at Union Station 20 years ago. My name is Stella Nova." I stood up, the movement fluid and decisive. I pulled a $10 bill from my wallet and placed it flat on the table, more than enough to cover both our coffees. It was a final transaction. "And Stella Nova," I added, looking down at him one last time, "has no father in Mesa, Arizona." I turned and walked out of the Starbucks, my back straight, my steps even. I didn't look back. The meeting had given me the final piece of data I needed. They weren't worthy of my time, my anger, or my grief. But as I walked out into the blinding, indifferent Arizona sun, a new, unsettling question took root. A question that wasn't about them, but about me. Was that it? Was simply walking away truly the end? Or was there one last thing I needed to do, to be completely and finally free? As the plane descended towards Chicago, the city lights sprawling below, like a galaxy of fallen stars, I knew the answer. Walking away from that coffee shop wasn't enough. It was an ending, but it wasn't my ending. It was a reaction. I needed an action. The 12-year-old girl still huddled inside me, the one who had been left voiceless and powerless on a cold station floor, deserved to see this through. She deserved to witness the fall of the giants who had terrorized her world. This wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about me, standing in my own power and writing the final chapter of my own story so they could never hold the pen again. From the airport, I called Leo. "I'm going back," I said, my voice clear and calm. "I'm flying back to Phoenix in the morning." There was no judgment in his voice, only unwavering support. "Okay," he said simply. "I'm here. We're all here for you when you get back." My next call was to Dr. Bright. She understood immediately. This wasn't a relapse, it was a graduation. The next day, I walked into the sterile, quiet corridor of the Mesa Cardiac Intensive Care Unit. The air smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. I found his room, and there he was, Silas Astor, the titan of my childhood, the booming voice that could make me shrink with a single word, was now a frail, withered figure lost in a tangle of tubes and wires. The rhythmic, monotonous beep of the heart monitor was the only sound of power in the room. And it wasn't his. He looked small, pathetic. Clara sat hunched in a chair beside his bed, her face a roadmap of sleepless nights, her hair thin and white. When she saw me standing in the doorway, her eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with a desperate, theatrical hope. She scrambled to her feet, her hands outstretched. "Luna, oh my baby, you came." I raised a single hand, palm out. A simple, quiet gesture that stopped her cold. The power in the room shifted so palpably, it was like a change in air pressure. The girl who was once ordered around was now the one commanding the space. "My name," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm, "is Stella, and I am not your daughter." Clara froze, her mouth agape. The beeping of the monitor seemed to get louder in the sudden, heavy silence. I walked slowly to the foot of the bed, my gaze fixed on the man lying there. His eyes, clouded and weak, flickered open, struggling to focus on me. "I'm not here for your apologies," I began, each word delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "I'm not here for your deathbed regrets. I'm here so that you can see me. I want you to see the woman I became, not because of you, but in spite of you." I let my eyes sweep over him, taking in his diminished state. "You wanted to teach me a lesson about how cruel the world is, but the world has been kinder to me than you ever were. I have a career I built myself. I have a husband who loves me unconditionally. I have a family, a real family that chose me. You tried to break me, Silas. You tried to destroy a 12-year-old girl, and you failed." I then turned my gaze to Clara, who was now weeping silently, her hands covering her face. "And you," I said, my voice just as cold. "You stood by and watched. You held his coat while he did it. Your silence was more violent than his rage, because it came with a smile. You were supposed to be my mother. But the only lesson you ever taught me was the most valuable one of all, that love has absolutely nothing to do with blood." A faint, rattling sound came from the bed. Silas was trying to speak, his hand weakly gesturing. A choked, gurgling apology started to form on his lips. I'm sorry." "I don't need your sorry," I cut him off, the words sharp and final. My voice didn't waver. "It's 20 years too late, and it's worthless to me now. I don't need your remorse. I don't need your absolution. I just need you to know that you no longer have any power over me. You are nothing more than the strangers I used to know." I held their gazes for one last, long moment, letting the finality of my words settle in the sterile air. Then I turned my back on them. I walked out of the room, my footsteps steady on the linoleum floor. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. As the heavy door to the ICU swung shut behind me, I felt a weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying for 20 years simply lift from my shoulders. It was a physical sensation, a lightness in my chest, a quiet in my soul. I walked out of the hospital's automatic doors and into the bright, clean air. I took a deep, full breath, the first truly deep breath I'd taken in 2 decades. The sky above Chicago had never looked so vast, so blue, so full of promise. I was free. My real home, my real life was waiting. And so my journey to freedom is complete. But I've learned that the most powerful stories aren't just about one person. They become a mirror for our own. So now I want to turn this story to you. I ask you this: if you could go back and speak to the younger version of yourself, the one who felt lost, unheard, or trapped in the dark, what is the one message of hope or strength you would give them? Please, write that message in the comments below. Let's fill this space with the light we all deserved, because your words of survival might just be the beacon someone else needs to find their way home today.